Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Coming up on the Payoff, this is a special one. We've had athletes, we've had musicians, we have had successful business people, we have had actors, but we have never had a doctor. And Dr. Nishant P is an accomplished surgeon, and he was also a very accomplished alcoholic. He's got experience with years of sobriety, and his story is unbelievable. He has an ability to articulate the message and his journey, which really connects. It connected to me. This is a lot of wreckage we cover in his story. He was an alcoholic that developed a physical dependency on alcohol, which led to lost opportunities, going on rounds with bottles of vodka. Never performed surgery drunk, but got a DUI where he was like a .45, which should be a dead person. And then he got sober. And he talks about the disappointment he had as far as his parents were concerned, them being disappointed in him and him kind of feeling that to this day. But we kind of stumbled upon the fact that, oh, by the way, his parents, when he was talking to me on this podcast, were sitting in his house, visiting with him, taking care of one of his children. And that is the payoff right there. Those connections, those relationships, those real things. And this is a real alcoholic with a real great story. Nishant does a great job of breaking down what it's like to work in a profession where it's so ego-based and ego-driven, the medical field, especially being a surgeon. But at the same time, when you're an alcoholic trying to get sober, you have to surrender. And that's something he did. And he's just incredibly humble and has a great story. Also, some great music. Here's my man, Kevin Souza.
Hello?
Nishant.
Hey, Pete. How's it going?
How's it going, dude?
Good. Great.
Where are you right now?
Virginia. I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia from LA back in January.
Oh, no way. So I went to school at the University of Richmond.
Oh, did you? Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like an hour. We go down there a lot. I'm at UVA. Yeah, academic is it's where I'm at for now. There's a lot of kind of new challenges with academic medicine, but I like to teach for the most part. So teaching residents and med students. So that's what I do here mostly.
Do you still practice?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm super busy, but the residents are just part of it. Yeah.
Okay. So you are an endocrinologist, right? Or endourologist?
Correct.
So what'd you go to, 17 years of school?
So after college, it was, 2004, 2017. Yeah, 13 years after college. Yeah.
So 13 years after college. Where'd you go to undergrad?
University of Arizona.
Oh, okay. In Tucson.
Yeah, undergrad and med school at University of Arizona.
And are you from Arizona?
I am. I grew up in northern Arizona.
Okay. Well, as I was saying earlier, you're our first doctor, so thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
For breaking the mold. So talk to me a little bit about your upbringing. You grew up in a traditional Indian family, right?
I did, yeah. My parents moved here in the late 70s from India. My dad moved to Chicago, and it was difficult. Didn't come with much money, not a lot of means, and he tried a few residencies out, got fired from a couple, didn't like the other ones, and eventually got a position at University of Chicago. That's where my brother and I were born. And he continued to move around until he got the right job, which was in a town in northern Arizona, Prescott, Arizona. It was like 20,000 people or something like that back in the late 80s. And we were one of the few Indian families there. So we moved when we were young, so it's all I knew.
What the hell is that like?
But
What is that like growing up?
yeah,
I mean, like, you must feel unique. Like, how does that affect a young person emotionally?
yeah. I had a good childhood. If I think back on it, a lot of other of my friends, colleagues, in recovery, out of recovery, didn't have great childhoods. But when I think back on it, I had a really good childhood. We grew up kind of in the woods. I had tons of friends. There was occasional issues with being, different. Uh, some like really just minor racism stuff because we were the only Indian family. Mostly confusion of what I was. Uh, but I had lots of friends that stuck up for me. It was I can look on that time and say it was a good time.
It's
As a
crazy
child, yeah.
too. Like, because I had a pretty good upbringing. I mean, I had a really good upbringing. There was alcoholism in my family, which kind of played out as it did a little bit around the household and certainly in me. But I don't have
Yeah.
any. I don't have any. I don't have any excuses.
Right. Yeah. The the growing up was fine, but there was still, and this is a common theme with alcoholics, it's just being different, just feeling it. Even though you have friends, sleepovers, parents are, you had a good relationship with your parents. It's just this inherent differentness, your uniqueness, um, that I think is common with a lot of alcoholics that I know.
As the terminal uniqueness.
Yeah, it's a terminal uniqueness.
What did you feel like when you took your first drink or drugs? Or first of all, are drugs a part of your story or just alcohol?
It's alcohol. Yeah, it was, you know, going to high school, college, certainly there was dabbling in the other things, but alcohol was definitely the thing. And I was 15. My parents are not drinkers at all, but they had it for guests. It wasn't like I was surrounded by it. I've probably heard the term alcoholic and, had this vision that most people have that aren't familiar with alcoholics, of, some poor homeless guy on the streets. But when I did drink it, I had that moment that is so, well described by our sort of, oh, this is it. This
Yeah.
is the thing that's going to help me out. Now I feel welcome, right? And it was just off to the races. I remember the first time was we took some, oh God, I don't even know, this old scotch, and it was out of my parents' gazebo. And I came home. I woke my cousin up, and he just clocked me right then and there.
He hit you?
And then yeah, I woke him up at like 3 a.m. Like, hey, I'm drunk, and he wasn't having any of it. And so I passed out of my bed, puked, woke up in the morning. I was like, I feel bad, but I'd like to do this again, almost immediately. And that's just not a normal response. And I kind of in high school, started going to all these parties, and I would be that guy that just got, completely obliterated, passed out. And then I started doing this weird thing where, if I found out if I got passed out, people would take care of me. I would fake being passed out. So that's like immediate pathology right there.
Yeah. So you would fake being
So,
passed out kind of to get maybe
yeah,
get attention or just to be treated a
yeah,
different way.
yeah, for sure. And I was, but like fully aware of what's going on, but like eyes closed and like limp, being carried out, but like feeling like a king while that was while that was happening.
It
Um,
makes perfect sense.
yeah, I'm like, here I am. This is it. This is how it should be. Um, and the whole time I'm doing this, I'm excelling at school because I had wanted to be a doctor since I was 4. My dad's a doctor, but there wasn't really any push from my family.
So there was
It
no
wasn't like,
I wanted to ask you, there's no pressure on
yeah,
you to become a doctor.
yeah, yeah. It wasn't like, oh, this pressure's killing me. It wasn't. And going, I got in trouble with the law at an early age. Underage drinking, trespassing, all those sorts of things, which kept me out of a lot of the, other schools that I applied to. and I ended up staying in state, which was great. I actually loved that school.
Where else did you apply?
And
Did you, first of all, you knew you wanted to be a doctor?
yeah, so I was applying, like I had the grades and the scores and all this stuff, but there's like these legal issues on my record that were very evident and very recent. Like Stanford, UCLA, all these other places. Um, and it just wasn't going to happen. Like there's a screening process, and it didn't work out. But I ended up going to the state school where it was my first time really out of the house and in the dorm. And when you feel like you're free and unsupervised for an alcoholic, things can really go off the rails. And it turned into more binge drinking because I was very serious about school, I recall, but there was a lot of binge drinking happening in college, definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just when you talk about it's because this happened to me too, in another way, but right away as a kid, you're experiencing. It was obviously looking back now, sober, it was kind of meant to be probably going to the University of Arizona and staying in state. But like right away, like we get consequences early on, and we just blow right by them. It's like whatever. But at the same time, like early on, your drinking was affecting what you were going to do. It dictated it.
It did. And then I'd be like, they don't understand. Don't they see these scores and these, grades? And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that this, I may be a problem.
So when you're in college and it starts to kind of, like you mentioned, the binge drinking, it kind of goes off the rails. What starts to happen?
Getting, I didn't get a DUI yet, but definitely, sleeping in my car. There was some other trespassing, drunk in public, disorderly conduct. And these are mostly happening on the weekends. And then, I'm still pulling the grades and doing all this stuff. And that was my justification to myself to continue both things. My friends describe me as a guy, the one word they use is more. Like I just want more, and if I can do both these things, then why the hell not? I don't know moderation. All I know is extreme. That's kind of my way of drinking, my way of doing life, and it's something that I just I've had to come to terms with, like being aware of my own extremeness, and that the effect it has on other people. Man, I disregarded that for so long. I'm like, people are going to have to deal with me. I'm going to be me. And there's, I'm one of these extreme people. And if they can't deal with it, so what? That was my MO.
And
a lot of this stuff.
We'll get to more of it down the line, but it sounds like you speak like a guy who got the gift of perspective, right? Because when we're getting drunk, for me at least, and you're bottoming out, like I had no perspective on anything going on around me. And getting sober, part of our program, I take a look at myself, and I really am enabled to get some perspective on the fact that, dude, it's empowering to know that I'm a creature that needs more. Because you don't beat the shit out of yourself. You're like, man, I sometimes I just amaze myself. I keep going back for the ice cream. I'm like, dude, this is pretty crazy. And I get a kick out of it. But before it was just like I had no clue. I would just keep consuming and consuming.
Yeah, and it took a couple days of I'd stop. Took a couple of days. I feel pretty good. Let's see what happens this time.
Were your parents at all like, disappointed because you mentioned they weren't drinkers? Did your culture play into that at all as far as?
It did. Yeah. They're very religious, and, they were just wondering, like, what's wrong? What do you need? And they didn't know, but I would, this is when it started having kind of physical impacts as well. I have a very strong physical addiction to alcohol where I will drink very heavily and try to stop. And I've had to be admitted a dozen times for withdrawals and In the emergency room, they had to call my parents. They'd show up because they always show up. That's the thing. It was unwavering, unconditional support, which just, hurts me now that I think back on it. They were always there for me. They didn't know how to help, but they were physically present.
Are they alive today?
They're alive. They're actually visiting me now. They're sitting there with my baby downstairs. And
dude, that's the gift of sobriety. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the gift of sobriety. Like, it's like whether you want to call it a living amends or whatever. I mean, they're at your place with your kid.
Yeah.
And you're sober.
Right. Yeah. They don't. I mean, they used to. They're like, "Where are you going?" They used to find bottles around the house. When I came home to visit, I would have stashes that they didn't know about, and they'd find it sometimes while I was there, sometimes while I wasn't. But they knew after a while. They knew if I was drunk, and how much of a problem it was probably going to be that time, and a lot of disappointment, But I didn't care at that time, and I stayed in. Going back to college, I stayed in Tucson for medical school. A lot of legal issues and things like that, and then
what kind of legal issues, like DUI or?
Not yet. Still, it was using fake IDs. A lot of, I was out there just getting very disorderly. That was like my thing.
Wait, I used to tell people I used to love it. Just get drunk and go places. I don't have.
Yeah,
that.
I used to go places and not be allowed in places. And but for some reason, after the first 2 years of med school, I think I slowed down a bit, honestly, because it was such a heavy load just to understand medicine. I did, and I took it seriously. I took drinking seriously for sure, but I really, I wanted to see this thing through. But I was lonely too. It can be isolating to be in school, and I was one of those guys that studied on his own, didn't go to class really. I just did everything on my own. And I picked back up after the first round of exams, like really picked up.
In med school?
Yeah, and this is when you kind of have to, you do your rotations. And it turned into daily drinking, and I can't tell you when, but at some point I would need it in the morning. So I'd bring a water bottle, empty it out, fill it with vodka, go on rounds and see patients. And, I'm not really in charge of patients at this time. I'm still learning. But, that was like, yeah, I have to do this. I can't make it through this day if I don't do it this way.
And how conflicted are you as somebody who is who's educated in the field of medicine? I went to rehab with a guy who was a lung surgeon, and he was accomplished, and he was drinking gin before he would perform surgery, and it's like that's insanity to even to us, right? Me and you as alcoholics, but it's still like. But you put yourself in somebody's shoes, and as an alcoholic, you're like, I can see how it would happen, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
Now you're armed with this education as far as medicine is concerned, and you're drunk talking to patients. Is that having some kind of deep impact on you? You think?
Not at that time, because I'm looking at things very objectively. Like I hadn't found any sort of introspection or spiritual awareness. I just took it as a very matter of fact thing that I won't feel good if I stop drinking. I can't do my job. I can't, I can't function, because then I'm like completely addicted to alcohol. I physically need it. I mentally need it. The thought of being without it is just unfathomable at this point. This is like peak drunkenness. It's like, that's how I made sense of it, really.
Now, go ahead.
Yeah. And, I wanted to do this field of urology, which is super competitive, and, still drinking heavily. And I would show up to these interviews, drinking in the hotel room beforehand, interviewing drunk, thinking, yeah, I'm just going to come off real smooth. But now just looking back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone knew. Everyone just had to know.
Did you go to the interviews where you thought, preliminary stuff, you're like, I should get this job. And even looking back, where
Yeah.
you're like, I should have gotten that job, but you blew it in an interview face to face where you were loaded.
Oh, a lot of them. Yeah, you'd fly around the country to these, big programs, and you're sitting there, and they're trying to get to know you to figure out if they want to train you for the next 5 or 6 years. And there's, you've got a lot of great competition. And if you're going to be with a guy that obviously probably didn't interview very well, slurring his words, bloodshot eyes, not looking that great, you easily move off their list. And I didn't get into urology the first time I went around. It didn't happen. So I was stuck. Like, oh, so what am I going to do now for a career? Like, this is all I want to do.
Was there more drinking behind that, you think?
Oh yeah. Then I got even more drunk, just to kind of numb the disappointment of, you go to school and train and for all this time and you don't get the one thing you want to do in your life. The drink's there for sure. And I took a random non-paying job in New York City at Cornell, which is one of the, country's best institutes. And I moved to a little apartment in New York, new town, no parents, never lived in New York, really never was that far from home. My parents paid for an apartment there. It was cheaper than it is now, but it's still pretty expensive. And I don't know why they did that. If it was my son, I'd be like, no, this sounds bad. And that was, drinking maybe 2/5 a day, like really, really, really drinking. You could get it delivered there. They'd just deliver it right to your front door and leave it. You'd leave some money out, and that was the transaction. And I would end up in the hospital that I worked at, 3 or 4 times. Just couldn't get it. Couldn't understand how I could live without alcohol.
Had you tried at all, like, to stop, or were you just kind of like, because there was a point in time where I was just like, look, this is just who I am, and I need this stuff to function. So there was a long time where I didn't even try to stop.
Yeah, you just kind of give up on stopping. You want to, it's, one of the scariest moments that, like, the things that I said is, my dad had come and he's like, what are you feeling? Like, how do you feel? And I said, I feel nothing, man. And if I ever hear an alcoholic say that, I know that that person needs like extra support. When you start feeling nothing, no emotion, no awareness at all, that's very scary stuff. And I said that myself, and that's probably the most worried I've ever seen him. When you feel absolutely nothing, when you're so numb to the people around you, your work, your place, your purpose, I think that's a scary spot for anybody, but certainly alcoholics.
Was that like complete apathy? Did that kind of move you towards like any kind of suicidal thoughts or anything?
A lot of passive stuff I probably tried with drinking. It wasn't anything active. I could see how people can go a step further, but it was, I just thank God I didn't go there.
Yeah.
But a lot of passive stuff of, I could, like, hey, if I didn't wake up, that may be okay. I don't want that, but I'd be cool with it. That kind of passive ideation. Yeah.
And so what are you doing as far as the medical? You have a non-paying job. You're up there working for Cornell. What exactly was your job?
It was research, and I did some of it, I guess. I don't know. I wrote like a paper. I wrote a paper mostly going, in New York, you can literally walk down the street and meet a whole new set of friends, right? They're alcoholics. But on any day, it's an adventure, right? You like to go places. New York has a bunch of places for you to go. And interestingly, this is when I walked into my first AA meeting because I was just so physically ill. I didn't really have like a moment of clarity. I just was like, okay, what is this AA about? I didn't reach out to anybody. I didn't have like a unicorn or, someone show me the light. I kind of just said, how about something other than taking the drink today? And I walked in. It was probably up on like 80th Street and York, there on the Upper East Side. And this lady was just telling her story, and she was saying, I was hiding it at work, hiding it at home, and I didn't realize other people did that. Right? I was so isolated in my drinking that I didn't think, I couldn't even fathom that there were other alcoholics out there. And it was so much truth, that I just walked out of the meeting. I couldn't handle it. Like, I couldn't stay because it was like my first glimpse that, I may need to actually stop drinking, and there may be actual help for me. Like,
it's like you're hearing your story, but you're not ready. It's terrifying.
No. Yeah. I was like, oh God, they're out there.
You'd have been confirmed, like the curiosity that you had, and it's kind of the last thing you want to learn and confirm, but at the same time, it's an absolute gift. But yeah, you must have been kind of spooked.
I was. And so, man. And, I tried for to get into urology is a match process. And so the whole goal of this research here was to try to match into urology once again. And I went to a bunch of interviews. Wasn't drinking, but I saw a doctor that had given me, oh God, like Valium and Ativan and all this other stuff. So I was kind of snowed on that. And, probably not the right method of stopping drinking. It's just switching addictions.
Yeah.
And I didn't match again. So that's the second time I didn't get to do the career I wanted. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I moved again. I moved to Detroit, Michigan, which in hindsight was the absolute best thing I could do for myself.
Was that like another educational opportunity?
Yeah, it was for Henry Ford Health System, and it was kind of more clinical stuff. So you got to work with patients, and I actually went there sober for about 4 months. I had gone, I went back before I left New York. I found a sponsor, was working with them, still didn't understand, the program or if I wanted it, but just going through the motions, really.
Yeah, but you gave it a shot. You kind of were like,
yeah, I gave it a shot, man, and moved there. And then I think even before I started work, a friend of mine was like, hey, you should come to Lollapalooza. I've got some tickets. I was like, nah, I got to start this job. But then, I remember the moment, like I'm sitting on the computer, should I buy this ticket or not? And it's like, when you take a fork in your life, I just clicked yes,
Yeah.
And that was the last time.
Dude, and I don't know what the hell that is about us, because I had a similar experience where I had bottomed out. I was 27. I stopped drinking for about 4 months. Then I started smoking weed, but I didn't drink again. And I moved to Colorado for a job opportunity. And the moment like the plane touched down in Colorado, I was kind of happy to move. And I don't know if I was happy to get away from the AA or whatever, but the moment I got there, I started to drink like right away. I don't know. I was not ready,
Yeah. Yeah. If you're not ready, you're not ready.
Yeah.
And, we weren't protected against that drink at that time. We didn't have enough time or knowledge or reliance on a higher power. We were vulnerable and open to just doing what we knew how to do, I think.
What do you say to the fact though, that, cause dude, we could have died.
I could have died many, many times. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you go back out, the fact that we make it back alive is, somebody says it's a miracle, somebody says it's whatever, but I look at it as a miracle, because going back out there, I was like you, I was putting myself at risk daily,
Oh, yes. Very, very much so.
Although it's been 20 years since the events of 9/11, many of us can still remember it like it was yesterday. America, and the world even, has never been the same. From Rafaelion Media, the King of the World podcast series explores the many repercussions of that day for the American Muslim community through the journey of host Shahjahan Khan, a high school senior at the time. Shahjahan's story is something our listeners will respond to. Throughout much of his young adult life, he found himself abusing drugs and alcohol as he struggled with his mental health and his identity as a Muslim in this new America post 9/11. King of the World is his story, told in 7 parts. You'll learn about his struggle with sobriety and belonging alongside the major headlines of the last 20 years. Written and produced by American Muslims, King of the World is a sometimes comical, often heartbreaking examination of adversity that all Americans need to hear. Subscribe now to King of the World wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, so you go back. You're in Detroit, or you're outside
yeah.
of Detroit. Yeah. So what happens?
We fly down. I meet up with some buddies. We fly down to Chicago, and it's just a complete mess down there.
This is Lollapalooza.
Yeah, and it's just a total messy thing. You know, we're staying at a friend's house, and I end up drinking all his alcohol. He kicks me out. Get a hotel next to Lollapalooza, and just, you know, I'm like, oh shit. Sunday night rolls around. I got to be at work on Monday, and I was like, I'm going to stick around one more day. I'll call in sick, because then I was really in charge of patients, and the thought of like operating, I could, you know, I've never done that.
Operating drunk.
I'm glad I did. Yeah, I don't, you know, that just never. I'd rather drink, right? If I'm going to be drunk, why would I want to operate? That sounds terrifying.
Yeah. It's funny now because we're sober,
you know.
but yeah, it's like, if I'm going to, why would I want to operate if I'm drunk and just be drunk?
Yes, that's not what I want to be doing. And so I called in sick, and I think I got a flight back on like a Tuesday. They're wondering, where am I, right? And, you know, I load up when I get back to my apartment in Detroit for a long bender. I get like 2 1.75 liters. Like that's heavy. Yeah. And I just start going through it, and, you know, I wake up, I think it's on a Wednesday morning, and I go, this has to stop. I'm like, you know, hallucinating. I don't know what's what. I haven't eaten in a long time. I don't have any food. And so I don't know what it was, but I look up this addiction doctor. I call him and I tell him what's going on. He's like, you should come to my office. I'm like, oh, great.
Are you wasted at this time?
Yeah, I drive there on a Wednesday morning in Detroit and get pulled over right as soon as I'm about to pull into his office. And, you know, the guy, it's obvious. Like, there's no hiding it. You know, I think I blew like a 0.45 or something.
Whoa.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was probably running a lot of the time back then. And I'm a small guy. I'm like 150.
A 0.45. Now we're talking what? Like how many times the legal limit? You're the doctor.
Yeah, so 0.08.
Yeah.
Times that by like 6 almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was running at a lot of the time. That was my physical dependence. And so he takes me to jail, right, in Detroit on a Wednesday morning. Car's impounded. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm in there with some other dudes, and I remember the moment of clarity, man. I remember it in a Detroit jail cell, and I was just faced with 2 options, you know, like death or anything else, literally anything else but that, other than, you know, leave this world, you know, in an alcoholic death, or something other than that. It wasn't like life. I wasn't ready for that yet. It was like, you know, and I could have gone either way, but I didn't. I really felt like either choice sounded okay. And I started to go through withdrawals in jail, and they can't have that in jail. So I got kicked out of jail, and sent me to the hospital. And, you know, my family came, I told people at work, and it was just like this sudden switch of like an outpouring of, I'm sick, I need help. I still want to be a doctor, but that's not my priority right now. I just want to not die. You know, I want my family to stop, like, you know, having the most anxiety they've ever felt over me. It was this weird switch where I just said, this is, you know, I'm an alcoholic. This is who I am. I've done all these things, as the record shows. And I went inpatient in Detroit for like 34 days. Mind you, I'd been to some other rehabs my parents sent me to, like in Malibu, where they give you like a masseuse and a horse to ride on and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, this is not going to keep me sober. And it didn't. The first night I got there, I got my wallet stolen.
And this is
Detroit.
This is the one in Detroit.
Yeah, I got my wallet stolen. Some guy like threatened me. I'm like, oh God. Well, I'm not gonna have fun here. I should probably just try the program. And I did, and it just was a slow, painful process of doing. They have a lot of the program comes to inpatient rehab. It's there, and made some friends. Some people that actually wanted to stay sober. And this is right before I'm supposed to apply for my third round of trying to be a urologist. Like I'm persistent, right? Like in my drinking and in what I want to do with my life. And I do it, and I get out. I do inpatient rehab. I'm going to like a meeting or two every day.
Are you telling people as you're? And this is maybe it's a stupid question because I think I've already answered it in my head. But are you telling people you're sober as you're applying? Probably not, right?
Yeah, I asked some of my mentors. They're like, hold off until you actually get the job, like that, because this is so fresh. It's like we can see you want to get better, but hold your horses.
Yeah, and sometimes the reason I ask is because sometimes we go so deep into the wilderness that like it's so out there, right? I mean, if somebody's going to look under a rock at exactly what I've been up to, it's like holy shit. And you say, hey, no, I'm sober, but so you didn't, and that's by the way the beautiful thing about the program and about being sober or being on that path is like, you don't know the answer, you'll ask someone, and if somebody in the program doesn't know the answer, they'll direct you to someone, whether it's, hey, why don't you ask one of your mentors in the medical field? Or, that is the beauty of this. It's the removal of the ego that kind of breeds itself, right? You see how the other people act that you think highly of. And it's like, oh, like they're showing me they don't know, but they're going to connect me with somebody who does. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful thing. And the issue with asking for help is that, it probably behooves you to follow that advice too. That's my other thing. Like I'll ask for help, be like, interesting, noted, without wanting to actually follow through on that advice. But I did, and I didn't keep it secret. I didn't, that's what I was not trying to live my life with continuous lies, but just kind of, I kept things close for a little bit, and I actually got, a residency. This is come January 2010. In San Diego, which was, my number one choice. And the day I matched, I called the chair down there, and I told him the whole deal. And he's like, let me call you back. Like he listened to the story that I basically told you.
How long had you been sober at that point?
Oh God, it's 4 months.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
4 months. And I couldn't convey to him that I was very serious about it this time, right? He's like, well, what's different about this time? I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do I know you won't drink? I'm like, you don't know that at all.
And it's so awesome, Nishant. You're so in the program that you're just being totally like, just unforgivingly honest.
Yeah. Unforgivingly honest. Most times it works well. And so, he's like, okay, but he wrote this like special contract up. He's like, if you drink, we're not going to kick you out, but we'll remove you, and then we'll see what happens. He's like, I don't want to go too far into this. And I took that very seriously because he gave me that chance, and I moved sober to San Diego and got into, told the hospital. And so the hospital provided me with resources for other physicians in recovery. And oh my God, that was so helpful. These guys are doing what I'm doing. They have the problem that I have. If I have any issues, I can talk to guys that have done, even have 6 months or 8 months. Like these guys can help me. Got a sponsor down in San Diego that I keep in contact with still, every week. And I think I really just flourished in residency. That's what the training was for 6 years. And I managed, to be sober going through this monitoring program where during my intern year, which is like the busiest time in a surgeon's life. It's like 80 hours a week, sometimes more, where they'd have to randomly call me for a drug test every week. And it wasn't on site, of course. And so I basically had to tell all the residents I worked with, all the surgeons that I worked with, I go, this is what I have to do. You just have to let me go. Otherwise I can't, I can't come back.
Yeah.
And they just understood, it's like this brutal honesty. They're like, well, all right, go pee and come back. We'll cover you. And that kind of support, really empowers you to want to be a better doctor, want to be a better sober person when people make adjustments for, a very personal thing that I suffer from.
For you, is it such a relief? Because I'm here, as you're telling me this, it's just like this, putting it out there in the light is so, I knowing as an addict and all the shame that which is bullshit, but the shame that I would roll with for so long, putting it out there in front of other people and seeing a positive response is just unbelievably cathartic.
It's very cathartic, and it allows me to be my true self. I don't have to, say, oh, I got to go do something real quick. I can't tell you what. Like,
which is so suspect, right? It's just like,
they're like, okay, that sounds weird. And, eventually I had a California medical license. Is not something easy to obtain. And I told the California Medical Board, and they put me on a probationary period. And I wanted to get off this probationary period so I could apply for additional training in what I do, which is kidney stone disease endourology. And I had to have a hearing in front of a judge, an attorney general up from Sacramento. And, who came to testify was the chair that I had called the first day.
Wow.
And it was emotional. And he got emotional. I got emotional, of what I had done for that program, how I had succeeded doing all this stuff. Like, hearing it from an outsider's perspective, I don't like to give myself a lot of credit. As I used to love doing that, but something happened where I'm very against it because I feel like it will just go to my head.
Yeah.
I get very uncomfortable with it, and to see that I had, I did the deal. I did what I said I was going to do, and it was obviously it was very moving for the judge, and it was just like silence after he told the judge and the attorney general about how they should have no concerns to get me off this probationary period, give me a full and unrestricted license, and they did. And I applied for training at the Cleveland Clinic, which is a great hospital. It's one of the world's best hospitals.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better, really.
I went there, and then I went to UCLA for a bit. That was, it wasn't the right first job, but I had some things happen in sobriety, right? As
life happens.
As life happens. Well, I was married. I met my wife actually in the initial period in Detroit. Called it off for a couple of years. She moved to San Diego, and we got married. And then as soon as we moved to LA, we had, the first day we moved was Father's Day, and she told me she was pregnant with our first boy, and I got very excited about that. And the ultrasounds didn't look good from around 20 weeks. They thought he didn't have a left leg growing in, and so that was just your first child. He did have some leg, but everyone told us he needs an amputation at 6 months to start walking. And I actually saw try to see the bright side on that. I'm like, at least it's just a leg. Everything else is developing normally. It's gonna suck. But when he came out, he had all his bones and all that sort of stuff, and he does need surgery, and we're actually gonna schedule it sometime in a few months.
How old is he now?
He's 3. He gets around just fine, but he needs surgery. And then, I continue to do AA.
So what's your program looking like? I mean, this is heavy stuff.
Yeah. And so the UCLA job didn't work out. I left it. I was unemployed during COVID as a doctor, which is kind of crazy. But I was, you know, I was not actually in a good spot back then because the job was just not great. It was, you know, I was offered a certain job, and as soon as I moved out there, they had told me they hired somebody else for it, and that, you know, a lot of resentment had built up, and eventually I just had to leave that job. And unemployed during COVID, and I said, you know what, I'm going to dig into my program, dig into my health, my mental health, and really just kind of make myself stronger before I jump back in, because this career is all about longevity, because burnout will happen, frustrations, people quit this field all the time. It's happening more and more. And I love what I do. So I didn't want that to happen. And so I took the time to just dig into the program with my new sponsor out in LA. And this job in Virginia just came up. You know, I'd never been out here. And it looked like the perfect job for me in terms of what I do for kidney stones. And it was. And it was nice because I could join up meetings in Virginia before I ever moved out there through Zoom. And so I already had a home group before I'd never met these guys. For me to have that sort of wherewithal and insight that's like very unlike me, you know?
It's not of you. It's not
no,
of me.
No, I'm like, let's move somewhere else, and, you know, maybe I'll drink, maybe I won't, screw it. I don't know what'll happen, but let's, you know, play it by ear, like shooting pistols in the air, like, and I got here and I dug in, and there's a great group of guys down here. We have a fellowship. I'm part of their home group. You know, secretary sometimes, and life happened again. You know, my wife became pregnant, and our baby girl came 3 months early this April. She was supposed to come in July, and you know, that just she was in the NICU, the neonatal ICU, for 3 months. And normally, if that sort of stuff would have happened to me, I would have distanced myself, drank, but I just dug in, you know, like, you know, like my entire family's relying on me, man. This little 1-pound girl is completely helpless. It was one of these things where, you know, I was powerless. I was 100% helpless. I could be there for her, but, you know, medically speaking, there were some really great doctors taking care of her, but all I could do was be there, and that's all I had to do, really, you know?
Yeah, and that's what we learn. Like, it's a lot bigger than us. Sometimes just showing up is enough. Like, you know, like, did you feel like you didn't have the power to fix everything? Was there a point in time where you were like, I just got to turn this over?
So much fear, right? I'm not one of these guys that says, yeah, I've conquered my fear. I have fear, but the gift is I know how to deal with it now. I can still have it, put it somewhere, and proceed despite that being present. It's like it's an acknowledgement of one's fear, because I try not to, you know, my ego tells me that I have no fear. You do what you need to do. Fear is for suckers. And as a surgeon, you know, the ego thing is just, it's a nightmare because it's so ingrained in the job. And you want your doctor to be confident, not fearful. But man, I'm my best self, you know, surgeon, dad, husband, when I can acknowledge my limitations, understand that there's fear, and then proceed in a logical way. Like,
well, dude, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. You have the perspective on your fear, so you know what you need to do to get through it, whether it's talking to another alcoholic, whether it's digging into your program, like you said, being of service, or just showing up. You know what to do with that fear. Before, you know, did you feel like you had that fear and you didn't know what to do with it, and you would just drink or panic or whatever?
I mean, yeah, a lot of anxiety, fear, and drinking. I mean, what a horrible Band-Aid that is, because it doesn't do anything to it. It's like it's not very effective, right? It's effective in blacking things out and pouring, you know, just blackness all over it, but it only adds fuel to the fire, really, at the end of the day. But when you're in it, there's, you know, the focus is so narrow when you're in the throes of it. There's it's a simple life, honestly. Um, the first step is, I'm powerless over alcohol, and my life was unmanageable. I was managing just fine. I was managing great because all I had to do was focus on drinking. That was how I was managing. That's not unmanageable. That's what I would tell myself.
Yeah.
I'm managing just fine, everyone. I don't have anything to worry about because I choose not to focus on anything else. And now that I know like the full spectrum of life, I don't know why I would ever go back there, because I know too much now. I have I have I had the gift of desperation, definitely in the beginning, but now I have I guess it's called the gift of abundance now.
What was it like for you?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. You have what? I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, the gift of abundance.
Yeah.
Like, I have my wonderful family. I have this job. I have this group of AAs, and new guys come in, and we dig in, man. We just dig in because I hate seeing guys in that position. I really don't. It makes me uncomfortable because it reminds me so much of myself and how terrible I felt. Right? I can't overlook that. I see myself in them. I can't just not pay attention to it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you're like me, but you feel it in your gut. You feel it for these alcoholics who still suffer.
Yeah, it gets uncomfortable, right? You're in a meeting and everybody's like, here's my life. That's great. Like you said, I got a life of abundance because this, that, and the other thing. And somebody walks in and they're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I got a day and I'm just trying to hang on here because if I drink, I'm going to go to prison. And then you're like, whoa. And I know exactly what you mean. It's uncomfortable. And it's one of those things where the pilot light turns on, right? Not that it isn't on already, but you're like, okay, what can I do to be of service and to help this person? Because moving towards that is what works for me. Mm-hmm. What about, I want to ask you about, substance abuse is not uncommon with doctors.
No.
What is it about it, specifically for you that you think made you susceptible? What is it about being a doctor? There's so much you guys deal with: stress, burnout, some of the learning. Michelle, my girlfriend, says it's who's friends with you. She says it's shame-based sometimes.
Yeah. Well, Michelle and I did residency together, and I helped her out through some tough times, but we went through a lot of this stuff together. And I just think that, some of the best doctors I know and some of the best alcoholics I know are just sensitive people. We will not let you know that. We will go to the grave to avoid letting people know that we're very perceptive and we're very sensitive, because it's almost too much for us to handle, all this. People come to us at their darkest hour, and we have the skills, but the skills are just part of it. It's the being able to relate. I've heard, in our field, and in alcoholism, I've just heard, just gut-wrenching stories of suffering. And I'm sensitive to that now. And some people, they don't want that. They don't want to feel that. They want to feel something else. And it's understandable, right? And so the stress of that, of being a caretaker, can lead people down this path. And I hadn't mentioned this, but starting in residency, I started talking to med students about my story, because it's a crazy story of bringing vodka in to see patients, and getting pulled over on a Wednesday with, what should be a dead blood alcohol level, to where I am now. I think just telling my story can help people. I don't try to, I can't tell you, I'm like, hey, you shouldn't become an alcoholic. That'll be really bad for you. That's not any sort of good advice, but that even if you do end up in this spot, there's a path, man. It can be weird and crazy, and uncomfortable, but there's a way out. And it just sucks when I hear these stories of physicians, especially during COVID. We know of some, urology resident, and there's a high level of suicide and self-harm. And this is one of my things I tell to trainees and other doctors. I'm like, this profession that we chose is meant to empower you to help people. It's not meant to break you down and make it sound like, suicide or substance abuse is the best option for you. That's a failure of our field, I think, if that's what it ends up as. And so I still try to do that. I still try to talk to residents and trainees about, the importance of self-care, whatever that is. Not everyone's going to be an alcoholic, but there has to be some outlet for you. There has to be some awareness of how you can be your best doctor. That's what I really want for all doctors. But the reality is it doesn't always end up like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like whatever your healthy outlet is, because I can't even imagine what some of the stresses that you guys deal with. A lot of your quote unquote success is outcome based. Have you ever struggled with that on the other side of sobriety, being in sobriety, because bad outcomes happen?
Right. Like I'm a card carrying member of the imposter syndrome club. Like,
yeah.
If I have a issue with a surgery, I'll fall on all the swords. I will, but it gets to you. It does, and you try your best, but sometimes the outcome is not what you wanted. And so I really dig in with the family members and the patients and let them know, sorry this happened, but I'm here. Like that's like I said, sometimes all you can do is be present and let other people know that you're there. And I've never regretted saying that, once they realize that obviously, you're suffering the most. I don't want my suffering to compare to that, but I'm here for you. And whatever you need, I'm there. I think, if I was in my, primetime alcoholic thinking, I'd be like, yeah, it happened. So what? Let's, this happened. This sort of stuff happens. And, that's where the program comes in. It's not necessarily an amends as to, I caused this, or there's many factors that go into complications. But, I was part of this issue, but I'm here. What can I do now that this has happened? Like that's always the part of the amends that maybe glossed over. It's reconciling your past, making your amends, but then the follow-up is there anything else you need from me that I can do for you to help with this situation? And that open-ended question has really helped me out through a lot of tough times. Is this was my part. Now what? Now what should we do?
Do you find relief in the 12 steps being a doctor? Because you have to surrender in our program, but there's a great amount of control that you need as a surgeon. Is that helpful to you?
It absolutely is, right? I used to, like, in the beginnings of sobriety, I'm like, and I hear some people have said this, I have a high stress job. This is just how I am. And I stopped believing that because I think it's a poor excuse for behavior. Your job shouldn't define how you treat other people. But you do carry some of it home, and there has to be some sort of separation. But, I was not born an empathic person whatsoever. Like I'm a guy at the grocery store. Like if the checkout person says, "How you doing?" I'm like, "Fine." But you're right. But you're supposed to say, "I'm well. How about you?"
Yeah.
That for me to do that is a real struggle, man.
Yeah.
That's like not part of my DNA, and so this whole empathy thing is like it's a learning process for me. I did not come pre-programmed with that sort of thinking whatsoever. Because obviously it's all about me. So when true empathy comes to me, it's uncomfortable, but at the end is like it's peace, right? That's what I want at the end of the day, is just some peace of mind. And if I can try to understand somebody else's situation and what my part is, and understand that what I do has an effect on people, this type of behavior of I'll do whatever I want and people have to deal. That's not what I'm striving to be. That's not how, my life gets better. That's how it gets worse, for sure.
All right, I got a couple more. I got a couple more things
Yeah.
for you before I let you go. Because this is unreal. What? Just this is specific to you being a doctor. COVID. We talk about everything that had happened to us as a society, right? Like, oh, COVID affected me like this. But
Mm-hmm.
in the healthcare profession, people are coming to you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
not enough people, or at least I haven't heard the question asked to a doctor, how has like the alcohol, like the substance abuse in the healthcare industry, how have you seen that at all?
Yeah. We've seen through COVID, we do hear of more substance abuse. There's, there's physicians that are dying by suicide. And I don't know what the reasons are, right? But people are being stretched to points where we didn't think they could be stretched to. And everyone has a breaking point, man. Luckily, I'm in a field that, I haven't been affected that much. Obviously, I've been affected by it in terms of if I can do surgeries or not, but there are like frontline workers and some of them are not doing well. I know drinking has gone up for just, citizens around the country. And for our programs, it was a problem because you're wondering where are these newcomers and what's going on outside of our Zoom meetings, what's happening with them. And we all had to adjust to that. But I've seen really good success stories of people, getting completely sober on Zoom and then finally making it to some in-person meetings. But as it relates to healthcare workers, we do see it takes a toll, and substances, unfortunately, are an easy out. That's the unfortunate thing about our field. It's an easy out with, sometimes disastrous consequences. It's been tough for everyone, for sure.
How about your relationship with music? Now, I know you were a DJ, and I'm sure this is a whole nother conversation, but because I'm sure there's a lot to unpack. But as a DJ, was substance a part of that? And when you got sober, how were you able to rediscover music? Because for me, a lot of the things I did, that it was bullshit. It was a lie I told myself. But anything creatively I did, I needed alcohol and drugs to fuel. And then when I got sober,
sure.
I had to relearn all that.
Yeah, there's just a deeper appreciation because you wonder, like, oh, did I just like the music for all the drinking and the partying? And then you revisit some of the things that you really, the music you love. Like for me, it's like mid 90s, like house music, like that's it for me. Right. And so getting back into that, and then getting the keyboard out, the synth, and you realize that the things you love, you still love. It's almost a deeper understanding because kind of when you're drunk, you don't have your full, awareness of it. Your attention is somewhat there, but for me, it just wasn't real at that time. But in my heart, it's like, I knew I loved surgery. I knew I loved music, and rediscovering these things as a sober person. And now the cool thing is, showing it to my kids who love, electronic music and showing them all these things that I loved growing up and teaching it to them as a sober person it just brings on a whole new meaning. It's amazing.
What are you going to teach your kids about sobriety? Or if you have already, you have two, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you plan? Will there ever be something you will say to them, or is that just something that you're going to deal with organically down the road?
Yeah, I think the thing is, he's his own person, right? He's my kid, but I'm just borrowing him from the universe for a little while. He's his own entity, and he may have this thing, he may not. He will know that Dad goes to these meetings, and Dad has friends, and we don't drink. He'll know that, but I'll just the only thing that ever helps me help other people is telling my story of what I went through, and when you do that, you're doing that without judgment. I think if I just tell my own story, this is what Dad went through. It was very scary. You know, there were times when I probably wasn't going to make it, but I did. Telling your own story has a great effect rather than me telling him like, hey, if you drink, you're going to have, you know, a bad life. He may drink and not have a bad life. I don't know. I don't know these things. But he'll know my story for sure.
Yeah, I have yet to meet, and I'm biased, but I have yet to meet the child of a practicing sober alcoholic that doesn't have, once they're able to, or once they're able to have an opinion, doesn't have real good things to say about their parents.
Right.
You know, somebody
Exactly.
who's practicing the program. You know, they usually have a real good feel about their folks. All right. Anything else? I'm going to let you get back to your life. This was unbelievable. Anything else you want to say? I always like to ask people this. What do you say to the person that's just trying to get a day?
It's such a, you know, the person trying to get a day. There's so many good cliches that keep coming back. And what I say to actual newcomers, you know, I ask them, I'm like, what do you want the rest of your life to look like? Right? Because that determines so much. If you can, you know, we're sober for just a day, but obviously we're thinking a little bit outside of that as well. And it helps me to think about a life that was free of the burden of alcoholism. What do I want the rest of my life to look like? I think it is a good question, because it can mean the difference sometimes between staying in the program. Sometimes the answer will be like, I don't know. All I know is drinking, and that person's probably not ready, right? But if the answer is, I want it to look like having, you know, some freedom and peace of mind, then that's the time to dig in and start really working with this person, because, you know, obviously we're not ready until we're ready, and I wasn't ready so many times.
Yeah.
And that's, I can't force someone to be ready. There's no way that, I don't know if anybody has ever convinced somebody to say, like, you're ready right now. That's what a sponsor's for, but it's an internal switch, like I had mentioned, that something happens. You reach out to whatever is outside of yourself. And for me, it was the floodgates open. I said, I want my life to look like, you know, something that is anything other than an alcoholic death. That just opened up a world of possibilities. It's like a simple thing that most people would be like, yeah, dummy, of course you should not die an alcoholic death. But that was the crux of my life. That was the question I needed to ask myself.
Dude, this has been unbelievable. I can't thank you enough for your time, man. You know, it's very clear why Michelle is so fond of you now. And I seriously, dude, I cannot thank you enough.
Awesome, Pete.
Thanks so much for listening to the Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.